Hello YouTube, Sidekick here in my brand spanking new Mirage F1 in DCS at Kobuleti. So, the Mirage F1 is a new airplane for DCS. Now, it's not primarily a ground attack aircraft, but it is equipped for air-to-ground. And at least all of the weapons that are available for it right now are unguided. It can carry GPUs, but there doesn't seem to be a system for guiding them yet. So it's basically an iron bomber, which means it's kind of right up my alley. And other channels have done a pretty good job of looking at the module in general and even looking at it in some detail, but no one has really looked at dropping iron bombs in detail. So that's what I'm going to do. And we're sporting two Ramp 250 250 kilogram bombs, one on each wing, on the interior pylon. And since the range is pretty close, let's just set up the weapons panel here on the ground. Let's go ahead and select our wing bombs. And then we need to make sure we've selected the correct pylons. We get a choice between interior, exterior, or both. We need interior or both. Either one will work. We also need to make sure that we fuse them. The default fusing is inert. We need to change that. And I think that's probably all we need to worry about for now. We do need to remember that we are going to have to turn on the master arm switch. First we will have to uncover it, and then we will have to turn it on before we go to the range. Let's see, I guess there's one more thing we want to do. We want to set the bomb sight depression. I'm going to set it to 100 mils on this dial here. Talk a little bit more about how we arrived at that number and how to use it once we get out to the range. But you are going to want to program a depression on your bomb sight. We've got 100 mils on the bomb sight, and I think that we are just about ready to proceed. So the Mirage F1, as we get ready to taxi here, in case you didn't know, the Mirage F1 is an aircraft that was obviously designed for the French Air Force. It was designed in the mid-1960s, 1966, I think design started it and entered service in the early 1970s. So it is typical of aircraft of that generation. Let's call them third generation, I guess. It's in DCS terms, it's basically concurrent with the F5 and probably the F14. It's newer, quite a bit newer than the MiG-21, and quite a bit older. It's really a generation older than the MiG-29. It is actually around the same age as the F-15, although the F-15 is certainly kind of half a generation newer. And it would be the same generation, for instance, as the F-4 or the A-6 when we finally get to see those aircraft. So one of the things that you will notice, because of the age of the aircraft, is the response of the engine. The engine does have a defined period of time that it takes for it to spool up, both on the ground and in the air. And you'll also notice when we get into the air that there is a momentary pause before the afterburner lights. So you do have to spend some time remembering to stay ahead of the power curve with this aircraft. And we will experience that a little probably when we're out at the range. So that is one of the features of aircraft of this generation, and the good news is that I think the Mirage F1 actually models it pretty well. It does a good job of giving you the feel of what it would have been like to fly an aircraft of its generation. And that, after all, at least for me, is what I come here for. So I'm really pleased with that. All right, we have gotten ourselves sorted out. So let's put the landing gear gate up so we can put those up easily. Final checks here. Let's put the flaps down. Flaps really only have two positions. And we'll spool it up, and once the afterburner lights right about there, we release the brakes, and it's just a matter of keeping it straight down the runway. I'm going to pull back to rotate it around 120 and expect it to come off the ground at 150. Don't really want a lot of back pressure because it is possible to tail strike the airplane if you're not careful. There's rotate. And there she comes. Gear up. Flaps up as we're going through 200 knots. And then we'll just hold the nose down a little bit to gain some speed and turn the afterburner off when we get to 300 knots. Right, and we're approaching that now. And there's 300 knots at the same time as we get the ILS marker beacon. So we'll pull back the engine. So about 8,400 is max RPM. If you go over that, you'll take it into afterburner. So we'll stay at max power as we climb up. Try to keep it around 300 knots. There's another marker beacon. So flying the F1 is actually a really interesting and enjoyable experience. I'll just add my sort of first impressions views to what you'll have heard from other channels if you've been paying attention. And that is that it really does have a flight model that does seem to be representative of the aircraft. It does fly like what I imagine a third-generation fighter would fly like. You certainly, it's not fly-by-wire. You certainly do have to fly it with both hands and feet. Rudder is required to make coordinated turns. And both the trim of the aircraft and the effectiveness of the controls are affected by speed. So you do end up having to fly the aircraft a little bit by feel. You need to know what the aircraft is doing to know exactly how to control it properly, which is good. That is what you would expect, I think, particularly from an aircraft from this generation. So, for instance, let's just take a look. I'm leveling off here. I haven't powered back, so we're still basically at full power. But now I'm going to try and hold the altitude here around 10,000 feet. But one of the things you're going to notice is that I don't fly with the nose level on the horizon. If I fly with the nose level on the horizon at this speed, then I will be descending. So we do need a little bit of nose up. So the center line of the display is not really a total velocity vector, at least not in this display mode, the nav display mode. It's really more of a kind of a zero angle of attack line, I think. You'll find that as the aircraft speeds up, because we're keeping the power up, and so it is accelerating, and as it speeds up, you'll see I have to keep that that center line closer and closer to the horizon to keep from climbing, but I still don't just put it in the middle of the screen and fly there if I want to fly straight and level. So again, that is a feature of this aircraft. It's a little bit different maybe than a fly-by-wire, sort of fully functional modern HUD that you might be used to. Again, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it actually makes it kind of fun to fly. Another thing that you're going to find about the aircraft is that it certainly is very different in a turn depending on whether or not you're going slowly or whether you're going quickly. Because it does have a slightly high wing. There's a little bit of adverse yaw, meaning the nose tends to track opposite the direction you're turning unless you add the rudder. But that effect is much more pronounced at slower speeds than it is at higher speeds. The other thing that is really helpful in this aircraft is the angle of attack indicator on the left-hand side, which is not only useful for landing, but also useful in a turn, because you'll find that as you tighten up the turn, the angle of attack indicator will actually come on. You'll get the green, and eventually you'll get the yellow, which is indicating that you're getting to the point where you're exceeding the sustained turn rate. And once it turns red, you'll really be losing speed in the turn. Regardless of how hard you're pulling, it's the angle of attack indicator that you really want to be looking at. It's a very useful indicator. Wish I had that on some other aircraft. I'm sure it's going to come in really handy, especially in air-to-air mode. But it is interesting to note here. The other thing, you'll see some lights there in the upper left of the dash that keep coming on and going off. Those are the automatic in-flight flaps and slats. So like a lot of aircraft of this generation, like the A4, the aircraft has automatic flaps and slats to try and increase its lift as it gets slower, because of course it's not really designed to fly at 300 knots. It's designed to fly much faster than that. And the wings, did have some trouble generating enough lift to be particularly maneuverable at this speed, and so it does have automatic flaps and slats, but they do add a lot of drag. So you will find that you can get into flight regimes between about 250 and 300 knots, where it does require quite a bit of power to accelerate the aircraft because you've got your flaps and your slats deployed, which again, similar to the A4. But, and again, really interesting that is well modeled in this aircraft. So all of which is to say, we just did a little detour here because I just wanted to show you some of the flight characteristics of the F1 that are important. Because if we're going to deliver bombs consistently, we're going to need to fly the aircraft consistently, and you need to get to know how it feels. Okay, so how are we going to deliver the bombs here? So in the manual, there are sight depression tables that tell you if you fly at a certain dive angle at a certain speed and drop the bombs at exactly the right altitude, then what sight depression to use. I have experimented with those. As per usual, I find it a little bit difficult to ensure that we get exactly those numbers every time, and I have been less than completely successful in delivering bombs that way. So I'm going to use a slightly different method. It achieves the same thing, but it's a method that I have been using on this channel for a while, and you're welcome to go back and look at some of the earlier videos in the Iron Bomber's Guide series, making sure we get the master arm on. Very important to do that. So here's what we're going to do. We have a sight depression set for 100 mils. And what we're going to do is we're going to dive in from 10,000 feet, and we're going to start the dive at 300 knots. Dives, if we do this right, the dive is going to be around, well, it's going to be between 25 and 30 degrees, maybe about 27 degrees. What we're going to do is we're going to pick an aim-off mark on the ground, and we're going to put the flight vector over top of that. And then we're going to wait for the sight to come up to the target to tell us when to release the bombs. Now, this is going to be at around a little bit between 2,500 and 3,000 feet, but I'm not going to be looking at the altimeter. I'm just going to be looking at the HUD, because I find this is the best way to stay consistent. So we picked an aim-off mark. You can see it's just a little bit beyond the target. The white shed is our target, by the way. We're waiting for the sight to come up, there. And we pickle, and okay, so those bombs dropped a little bit short. We'll see how short here in a second when we get the target impact tracking script results. Now, when you're using this aim-off mark method, I know it sounds funny, but the rule is if you drop short, aim shorter. There we go. We're about 50-odd meters off, and definitely short. So we aim shorter because that means that if our aim-off mark is closer to the target, it means we will not get to the release point until farther along. It will take longer for us to reach the release point because we're aiming closer to the target. If you don't believe me, you can go back and look at some earlier videos, but it does work. So we're going to need to aim a little bit closer to the target, so not quite so far beyond the target this time. And then we're just going to try and do exactly the same thing. Keep everything else consistent. The only thing we're going to change is the aim-off mark. Now, I realize that there are other ways of doing this. I find for me this is the easiest way to improve my consistency. Is not to try and pickle at exactly the right altitude, not to try and pick exactly the right speed. Really kind of to fly this by feel. You have to develop a bit of a calibrated eyeball in terms of exactly how far beyond the target you want to aim. And of course, if you decide to pick a different sight depression, then you'll end up with a different sight picture, and you'll be dropping at a different altitude. But really, the best way, at least that I've found to do this to get consistent, is to go out to the range. I decided to use 100 mils. Decided to dive from about 10,000 feet at this range, which gives me about a 27-degree dive, which seems pretty fair. If I start the dive at 300 and basically throttle back, I tend to hit about 450 at the bottom of the dive, and if I get the aim-off angle right, I can get to the point where I'm certainly within 50 meters, maybe even within 35. I think that is going to be pretty good results for the F1. It is very sensitive to all of those parameters, and it is at this speeds, it is difficult to fly it exactly accurately. One of the things that happens, for instance, is the trim does change dramatically as the aircraft dives, and you don't want to be pushing and pulling on the stick, so getting it trimmed just right is one of the things that you'll have to work on. Okay, so we're rolling in again, looking at the white shed. I'm going to aim beyond the white shed, but not quite as far beyond. So we roll over, we put the lift vector over the target, come up and roll out. You're going to need some rudder as you roll out. You've got a nice ladder there, so you get the ladder over the target so you know that the sight is going to come up to it. Slowly move the flight vector up to an aim point and just try to hold it there until the sight gets to the target. And then pull off. Now, you'll notice that we're getting a message that says that the aircraft has been damaged. I don't think that's from the bomb. I actually think in a funny way something is going on. There's a bug somewhere. When the aircraft rearms, I seem to lose one of my pylons, and I think that's what the damage is reporting, because I haven't seen any effect on the aircraft, and it seems like we're pretty high for that to be the problem. So let's take a look at our results here. Those are pretty good results, actually. We're just a little wide this time, so we weren't lined up right, but we were just about exactly the right length. So that aim-off distance seems to be a reasonable aim-off distance. Now, one thing that sure is nice in the F1 is having that afterburner. You get back to altitude pretty quickly, unlike, for instance, the A4, where sometimes it can seem like it's taken forever to get back up to altitude. Just gotta be careful not to keep tripping it there. And make sure we've overshot our 10,000 feet, so now we need to do a little adjustment here. And so you will find it does take a fair bit of care and attention to get to 10,000 feet and 300 knots. And if you overshoot either one of those, there's a little bit of work to get back down to it. And like I said, at 300 knots, you are going to be flying a little bit nose up. You are going to have the slats and the flaps deploying or cycling, and that's going to affect your drag, so you're going to have to change the power setting, jockey the power setting. So I guess all I'm saying is you are going to have to fly this aircraft. Even to fly it at 300 knots for the roll-in, it's not going to be automatic. You are going to be flying the airplane, and as far as I'm concerned, that's fine. That's the whole point. If you fly it well, if you fly your approaches consistently, then I think you'll be able to get consistent results. And there's probably a lot of people out there who are going to be able to fly it more consistently than I do. This is just the way that has worked for me, spending a couple of days straight just trying to figure out a way to give me results that I can live with. So part of it is getting it lined up so you're getting the right picture out of the cockpit, so you're seeing the target in about the right spot on the screen. And I'm just trying to adjust that a little bit. And we're aiming for that consistent dive picture. And we're aiming for a consistent aim-off mark. If we start at 300 knots at the top of the dive, we're going to have a fairly consistent speed. And again, the big thing is to stay very quiet on the stick once we're lined up. You don't want to be pushing and pulling because that will affect the sight picture a lot. Okay, we're rolling in again. Nice, coordinated wing over to roll in. We're going to bring the ladder up to the target, and then we're going to try and roll out, keep the ladder through the target. Bring the flight vector up through the target to our aim-off mark. Carefully, carefully. We're just going to try and hold it there and wait for the sight to come up to the target. And that is what I, in a former life, would have called a target round. So, we got the target at third try. And I think, all of our drops have been within 50 meters so far. And that one was right on target. So I think this is a system that can work. Like I said, you do have to, and there you see our results, pretty decent. So I also like that we are dropping at a bit more than 2,500 feet. Still not probably as high as you like to be dropping. In the era of the Mirage F1, ground defenses were getting pretty fearsome. Almost certainly there would have been IR missiles. There certainly would have been radar-guided AAA. Dropping at 2,500 feet to an enemy that knew you were coming, I'm not sure how survivable that profile would have been even in the day of this jet. But this wasn't its primary mission, and you can see as aircraft were developed for the strike role, you can see that they, like the A-10, which was beginning development around this time, the time that the F-1 was entering service. And they were really fixated on being able to add a lot of standoff, even before the advent of targeting pods. It really was about developing ways to deliver ordnance accurately from greater distances. But with the F1, if you can get up to 3,000 feet and hit the target accurately, I think you're doing pretty well. So, one more time, we're coming around the corner here. Again, it's just timing the turn, trying to stay at 10,000 feet, trying to stay at 300 knots, get ourselves set up for a nice, consistent roll in, and then pick our line so that we're going to be just about just the right distance from beside the target. And again, this is all just, I think, have to learn how to calibrate your eyeball. You just have to do this enough times to feel where you have to be to get that consistent roll in, get that consistent approach. Similarly, you got to fly the aircraft and learn how it feels at 300 knots. Just exactly how nose up it has to be. It's something that requires practice. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all. All right, we'll just go for that. We'll add some insult to injury here and see if we can hit that building one more time. So again, we get the lift vector on the target. We're pulling up, trying to keep the angle of attack indicator from going too far into the yellow. Rolling out slowly, using the rudder as we roll out. Using the rudder to get ourselves lined up. Put the target, the sight, below the target. Pull up to our aim off mark. Try to hold it there and go. And we're not aligned as well as I would like to be on that one. Might have been maybe a little bit late. See what target impact tracking script says about that one. So as you can see, even when you know what mark you need to be hitting, at least I still find it pretty challenging to fly the aircraft consistently enough to hit it. Yeah, you see we're off. We're 50 meters long that time. Didn't look a whole lot different than the sight picture the last time. Part of it was I just pickled late. But yeah, if you want to get good at dropping bombs in the F1, I think you're going to have to spend some time working on it. I think it will repay the effort, though, because I do think that you will be able to drop bombs effectively. It can actually carry a fairly substantial payload. You can get 4 bombs under the wings, and you get another 4 on the fuselage. You can get 8 bombs. And if you drop them in a ripple, you can do a fair bit of damage. I don't think that you're going to be doing any precision strikes in the F1, at least not until the GBUs are enabled. But I do think that with a little bit of practice, you can certainly take out, larger installations. I don't think that you're going to be using this against point targets like tanks or infantry, but you could certainly be using it against airfields, runways, and that sort of thing. Okay, well, let's do one more, see if we can test out our system here by going after another target. We'll go after the big circular target. And again, so we need to sort of, this is going to be a test of, like I said, the calibration of my eyeball, picking an aim-off mark that's about the right distance away from this target, even though I'm looking at a different target. So it's a good test of the system that we're developing here. So again, just to reiterate the way that we're going to do this, we are trying to drop our bombs at the same height, same angle, same speed every time, but the way we're doing that is by rolling in at the same altitude, same distance from the target, same speed, and then what we are doing is picking an aim-off mark that will bring the sight over the target at essentially the right altitude. If we find that our bombs are dropping short, we pick an aim-off mark that's a little shorter. If we find our bombs are dropping long, we pick an aim-off mark that's a little longer, and that will adjust the altitude to correct the difference. But this way we don't have to be checking the altimeter and trying to pickle as we see a number go by. We just watch the sight on the HUD, and we pickle as the sight comes up to the target. And again, if we get ourselves calibrated right, I really do think this is a better way to be consistent than trying to look at the numbers in the cockpit. At least it is for me. I find when I'm trying to check the numbers, that's when I start flying erratically, and it affects my accuracy. And with the F1, you really have to be very quiet on the controls if you want to do this effectively. So let's roll in. We're going after that big circular target at the end of kind of the line back in the woods there. And again, nice smooth rollover. Try and stay coordinated in the wing over. We're bringing the ladder up to the target. We're rolling out with rudder. And we're using rudder at the end to finish it off and keep the ladder on the target, which means that the sight is directly below the target. Picking an aim-off mark around the base of the trees there, I guess. We're just going to hold it until the sight comes up to the target. There. And nice. All right, well, don't ask me to do it again. But I think that I've demonstrated that there is this technique that you can use to get pretty decent results. We were within 50 meters from pretty much all our drops. We probably averaged about 30 25 or 30 meters away, which I think for this aircraft is pretty darn good, especially dropping the bombs at 2,500 feet. So I'm going to call that a successful iron bombing range day. As per usual here, we'll just do a nice little wing over and go back and take a look at the range area. I'm certainly going to be interested in spending a bit more time in the Mirage F1. As I said, I like the aircraft. You really do have to fly it, and you do have to fly it well to be effective, certainly in an air-to-ground mode. I haven't tried the rockets yet. I haven't tried the high-drag bombs yet. Looking forward to giving those a try. If there's other things that you would like me to cover, or if there's other experience that you have in flying the aircraft that you think would help other people get better at dropping iron bombs from the F1, please feel free to add that in the comments below. And as always, if you would like to see more of these videos, it really does help if you subscribe to the channel, get the bell on, and also, tell your friends. And also like the videos, and adding comments is always a useful way of supporting the channel. There we go by the range. Let's just go up. Get that lovely afterburner, kick it in. And we can get the nose up high. You know what? Why don't we go up here and do a split S? This will be interesting as we pull down through the split S, just trying to keep that angle of attack indicator just cycling between the orange and the red. And that's really helpful in doing this kind of maneuver. Looking at that, keep our speed up. All right, well, that's going to be my first day on the range with the Mirage F1. I hope you guys have enjoyed that. Look for a few more videos coming, I think. And for now, this is going to be Sidekick, signing off.